Welcome back. You're watching Mornings Live with Tineka and Will. Now, last night, Will, the latest episode of Underbelly, The Golden Mile, the first one, 2-hour episode, aired on Channel 9. It's the third series of Underbelly. Now, the first season, we were
it was a smash hit.
Amazing, amazing. Second series, we weren't so fast.
Dud.
The third, do we love it or are we over it?
Yes.
We're joined by Michael Idato, TV critic and writer from the Sydney Morning Herald. Michael, what did you think of last night's episode?
I liked it, and I think actually I'll probably fall where most people will end up falling, which is that it's not as good as the first one. It's definitely better than the second, and the logical reason probably is that the second one, in the most basic terms, I really struggled to believe that Matt Newton was Terry Clark, and I think a lot of people found that a real challenge. And the first one will always be the first one, so even if they were to produce an Underbelly that matched it in writing, in production, in look, in sound, in feel, if the fourth Underbelly was as good in every single way as the first Underbelly, for example, it would still never be quite as good because the first one was the first, and it was new, and it had that. There was an innocence and a freshness to it that it was unlike anything we'd seen, and that will be impossible to recapture.
Was it just me, Michael, or was it slightly less gratuitous, this one, shall we say?
I thought it was much less gratuitous.
Yeah.
It actually surprised me because I read a lot of stories in newspapers sort of suggesting, you know, that it was the sleaze was back, and there were a few headlines that I kind of rolled an eyebrow at because I think I saw 2 episodes a couple of weeks ago. I saw the third episode a couple of days ago, and I actually found it profoundly tame in comparison. I think, in truth, that's probably a demonstration of a couple of times during the second Underbelly, the classification guidelines were breached, and 9 has at that time gave ACMA, which is the industry body that controls those things, a number of undertakings in terms of not breaching the guidelines in the future. So I think Underbelly, despite the fact that it was, you know, that it's always promoted as being quite racy and all that, you know, it's very sexy, it's very revealing, I think in actual fact 9 stuck very strictly to the undertakings it had given ACMA. So what we got was, I mean, not that it was tame, but I actually think it's a good thing. You know, when Underbelly gets cheap and easy and you know, tries to kind of play to its constituency with a topless girl or with a bit of needless graphic something. I mean, I actually think the audience, they can smell that a mile off. If it doesn't belong, you know it doesn't belong. And I actually think they do more damage to their credibility when they do that stuff. So actually, I think what we got was a pretty good hour of drama without too much of that sort of stupidly sort of distracting stuff that they, on some level, they probably think is part of the remit. But actually, I think the audience, to some extent, unless it belongs or it fits or it makes sense, the audience will tend to just go, come on, I mean, that was just cheap and gratuitous.
Well, it's great now because it can be a family show as well. You can sit down with the kids and enjoy it at that perfect time slot right before bed.
The kids to be too young, I wouldn't think.
Look, I wouldn't call it a family show by any stretch of the imagination. It is, and it's a really interesting. Underbelly does raise a couple of challenging questions for us as a TV viewing country and questions about how we classify shows. In the UK, they have a line in the sand, which I think is 8 o'clock, which they call the watershed. Yep. And if you put something to air pre-watershed or post-watershed, there are dramatically different requirements. And the good side of that is that things that are on after the watershed are pretty much protected from criticism because there is a really clear line in the sand drawn, and as a parent you know that if you've got your children watching TV after the watershed, if they see anything they shouldn't, really it's your fault for having them there. And I think in Australia we don't have that. We have a much more ambiguous thing, which is our kind of rough watershed is 8:30, but even then it's a bit, you know, at 9 o'clock, a set of different classifications kick in, but most 8:30 shows start at 8:30. So, you know, we have this kind of weird way of writing TV drama where the first half hour has to be a little bit softer than the second half hour if it's written into that 8:30 time slot. And it's very vague. I actually think we would all benefit enormously from knowing exactly where the line falls. So that way, if there are adult edgy, gritty, confronting shows to be made and aired. They can be aired happily after a watershed, and if anybody is up watching them and doesn't like them, then they either need to switch off or go to bed.
Yeah, which puts the power back in the parents' hands. I think it's a very, very valid point.
Absolutely, and I'm a great. I don't, my own personal. I don't believe personally in kind of nannying people, and I am a great believer that the remote control is the absolute arbiter. I've been writing about television for about 20 years, and I've had 1,000 arguments with parents and mothers about children and television and that issue. And at the end of the day, if you don't have control in your house, if you don't have the ability to either remove the remote, switch off the television, and I actually said to one mother once, even as basic as just deny it electricity, pull it out of the wall. Because the argument back was, but the kids switch it on. I'm like, well, they can't if you walk up to the wall and you physically pull the socket out. It's actually, at the end of the day, if it's my house, I will make the call. I'm amazed at the number of people who get upset about things that they could very easily avoid.
Michael, was the success of this series, and it's probably too early to suggest it's been a success, certainly perhaps a well-received first episode, but is its ongoing success and popularity, will it have a large say in the future of Australian drama and I guess big budget Australian-made dramas and mini-series on primetime commercial television?
Well, look, there are two kind of issues at work there. The first one is, in Australia we have a drama quota, and that is that the networks are obligated across a period of 3 years to produce a certain amount of drama, which is why every 3 years, we have a year where everyone goes, oh well, no, we're not making any television this year. And the reason is they make a lot of drama in the first year, they get a bit kind of lazy and go, oh look, we're doing pretty good, so they don't make anything in the second, and then in the third year they shit themselves and go, oh my god, we're going to run short, quickly commission something. So there is a little bit of that goes on. So there is a fallow year sometimes in the middle of that. So there is a legal requirement. We will always see Australian drama as long as good Australian citizens make their government compel
But what about
the
on this
commercial
sort of
sector.
scale?
Say that again?
What about on this sort of scale, Michael?
Well, I think there's the second issue, the second part of that is, I think what Underbelly's done is it actually has raised the bar. So I don't know that it means that every show will come out that will look and sound and feel at that level of production value, because Underbelly is an expensive show, but it's a very good-looking show. And unlike the great struggle for Australian networks is basically the divide between the way we make television and basically the way the rest of the world makes television and the way America makes television is widening, because it just is. So we make Australian dramas for $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 an hour.
Yep.
In America, they make 1 hour primetime dramas for $3 to $4 million an hour. And when you can see dollars on screen, those shows look quite different. So the challenge is, how can you put All Saints, which is produced for $500,000 or $600,000, on in a time slot before or after Desperate Housewives, which is made for $3 or $4 million, and expect people to go, I didn't notice the difference. So the challenge is making better television. Underbelly's raised the bar. I think the music is amazing, the production value is amazing, and for perhaps not that much more, so perhaps only, they're only hitting the $1 million an hour mark, they've made a show that has a huge amount of visual kind of add-on. Another great example is Sea Patrol. It's produced for about $1 million an hour, but with all that Navy hardware thrown in, because the Navy lets them use it, it has the look of a show that's made for about $2 or $3 million an hour. So the pressure is now on networks basically to deliver shows that can rise to the occasion, if you like. So, it doesn't mean every show that will come out is going to look as good as Underbelly, but it certainly means the pressure is now on visually to kind of match it, because the audience's expectation has risen with the bar, and networks, their single obligation to their kind of brief is to meet the expectations of their audience.
So going back to this first episode of the new season of Underbelly, what did you think of the acting skills in it? Anyone that stood out to you in the first episode?
Well, I think everyone will walk away thinking that Faraz Durrani, who plays John Ibrahim, is kind of the breakout star of the show, and he is. He's an absolutely fantastic actor. He's a very natural actor. I think for me, my kind of bugbear with Australian television is I'm convinced that Australian actors do terrible foreign accents, and I don't specifically recall noticing too many bad ones last night, but definitely in the third episode there was a couple of moments where I just thought, good God, can we just not, there are just some accents that just sound, and it's a challenge, because an accent is a really, really hard thing to master, and sometimes that's a bit of a challenge. But I always feel like that kind of falls short when we make TV shows.